All right, so this is Notes Towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1, a 17-part reading, elaboration, and/or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling. And then which part this is already problematic, because yesterday I read, elaborated, and interpreted David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling, Part 11. Part 11 for David, which was Part 12 for us, because we have an initial reading of Michael Mersel's introduction to David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling as well, and that brings the numerical value of the segments of our piece to 17 versus the numerical value of the combined value of all of the units of 1 involved in David Antin's 16 part, adding up to 16 part telling of varieties of rhetorical deception in narrative and non-narrative storytelling. So that's easy to figure out. There's 16 parts in David's initial discourse, and then plus 1, 16 plus 1. So n, if the 16 represents the number n, and then the plus 1, we have 17. And yesterday it was our part 12, which makes it David's part 11. And the problem is that I in no way came close, or we in no way came close to completing, right? And let's look at that word. So completion. The word in Greek for completion and is very close to the word in Greek telos, purpose. Telos is purpose, and teleos is completion, and some finishing in some manner, perfection, and then teleosis. Teleosis is the word that we've been utilizing to describe, right, and to name, the muse of perfection. So completion and perfection, finishing with nothing left out, or is part of that idea of teleosis, and that muse of teleosis that causes so much trouble for Tom, the character in the grand piano, played by Elijah Wood, right, who develops stage fright and can't finish can't finish his performance because he's so worried that it will be imperfect. So the idea of completion and finishing and the one-to-one correspondence between these segmentations is already become a problem, because I didn't finish, right? So there's an imperfection in the one-to-one correspondence between the promised 17 and what I can accomplish with the remainder of this series. Already that we're off count, and being off count in this sense is a kind of failure, in relationship to the muse, teleiosis or teleosis, or however we're failing to pronounce her name properly. And this doesn't exist in David's telling. The segments are largely performed around these thematic ideas that come to fulfillment and completion, and then he moves on to the next one. And in a certain way you could say that David Antin has an advantage, because there's no template, right, for what he's doing. He's just has to talk until he's exhausted the subject, and then move on to the next one. And I have to, both follow like the pattern that he's already, left behind, created in the 16, and, keep track of, the various elements of, my space, time interests, which are, developing and ongoing as viewers and listeners to yesterday's piece will be aware of, and the need, which may be unique, in some ways idiosyncratic to my personality, but the need or the desire, to draw, some of these, these tales and narratives and discourses as they exist into the past, into the present, and to utilize them to talk about, the contemporary situation and our threat, right, of becoming, an anti-democratic country under the tyrannical and authoritarian emergence of this fascism that expresses itself in the form of in various forms in the United States, but largely these days in the form of these magaga, or I had referred to them in an image that was rejected, in favor of the Julian Beck image, since Julian Beck is the performer who plays the part of Tiresias in Pasolini's cinematic version of Oedipus, the king. But on this image, I had parodied the Trump slogan that I guess is revised, to as a kind of banner for this American fascism, and I guess MAGA has become now Magaga, and I had parodied that with a slogan, "Make America." It's slightly complex and deals with not only Trump's slogan, but our personal history and narratives of what it is like to have a kind of cognitive or learning disability in the United States today. In circles, not just grade school, but in circles that in which you would think know better, but but that slogan was "Make America aha dada mama gaga again," and anyway, that as I said, that particular image and that particular slogan doesn't appear, but and it was rejected, and I had preferred the image of Julian Beck for a variety of reasons, not only because of his interesting performance in the Pasolini, but also because of his obviously because of his work in living theater and the wonderful journals that he left behind, documenting his meditations, which I highly recommend. If that volume is still available, again, it's a volume that I've lost over the years, but there was a volume of these journal entries and meditations provided by Julian Beck, and regarding the work of the living theater, as well as meditations on the various period spent in our incarceration for the kind of radical performance and performativity that his theater troupe performed, and I think it's an interesting a series and segment of series of how to put it, non-linear, right? Non-linear in the sense that each meditation is complete, and in that sense perfect, that belongs to Telaisis in and of itself, but they're not there's no attempt to link them together in a kind of like overly coherent form that involves kind of flow, right? And I've argued that that narrative never occurs as this linear and totally coherent flow of events across time, and I've that's part of our argument in this piece as well. And I've been arguing that for decades, and I've been arguing that the discontinuities in storytelling, are not just digressive errors or asides or mistakes, or but part of the inherent coordination and arrangement, right? Symphonia of narrative to begin with, and narrating and storytelling to begin with, but these little islands of meditation, I think in a certain way correspond to those islands of meditation that David produces in his own early work, and if we think of even if we think of this 16-part meditation that he's performing here, this 16-part discourse called Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling. Well, these 16, proximal islands, right, that form like this chain of islands, is if we imagine that chain of islands as still an island or island network in and of itself, you can distinguish it from the other islands of occurrence, right, and meditation that he performs with each one of these talk pieces. And so, in a way, you can imagine that, these various, and I believe, if I remember correctly, that, that these, I don't know if these islands are all, block paragraph, or if they're divided, by asterisks. I believe they have titles, and I believe their titles relate to the location in which these meditations were produced. They have, I believe that each of the meditations in the Julian Beck has a title, and that title includes the location where the meditation, begins, and a date, and those locations and those dates, and there may be titles that relate to the theme that the meditation is concerned with as well. And you could call this, you could call it like a prose meditation, or you could call it, and these messages, these that's interesting. I said these messages, and that's another example of a parapractice. And I guess I was, trying to conjoin the idea of message and an essay. These little meditations are kind of messages, I guess, messages, sent from jail or wherever, and these like kind of brief, essays on whatever, is engaging, Julian's mind at the time. And, but their concerns and their form and the idea of like this model, like that comes from Melite, it's a nice, example of a different way of approaching, a kind of similar, form and problem, from the way that, David, confronts and performs the problem in the meditations that he produces in this early volume of his meditations. And then if we take that idea of meditations, seriously in David, and we can say, well, in each one of these talk pieces, there's more of a flow and a continuity, right, between those early meditations and in these talk pieces than there is a break into a new way of working. It's just that they become somewhat longer, and the terms under which the space-time restrictions provide a platform, right, for these meditations, change. But other than that, there's clearly a lot of continuity. So anyway, so our problem then, right, is that when we reached part 12, which David titled, and I've just adopted his title, even though there are some errors in it. the errors, that relate, to this muse Tellius's perfection are different, from the errors that Tom is concerned about, right? In his performance of this piece, the song Ket, right? Written by his teacher and great composer who lost his fortune and whose lost fortune, right, becomes a part of a vector, like, that drives on the plot, right, and the threat that Tom experiences when he receives this note. Play any note wrong and you die. Like, as if that would relieve the pressure that causes the stage fright, right, that results from the muse, Tellius's perfection. So, in part 12, which he titles Danger, Deception, Delusion, Dramatikos, Eironicus, which we'll get to, Dramatikos anagnoreikos, which we'll also get to, but we won't get to them until we get to his recounting of the Aristophanes version of the Oedipus story that is titled The Smile of the Sphinx. Daulis towards Delphi, right? Okay, that's obvious. And then Donald's December declaration towards the destruction of America. Well, clearly, like, what's wrong in that last part, or the error that David makes in that last part, involves a space-time travel error. And the space-time travel that it involves is, however David does it or completes it, right? Whatever the method that he has of engaging, this information that he gathers from the future, he predicts that Donald's declaration of his running for the office of president in the 2024 election. And this, again, remember that David is producing this discourse on October 15th, 2003. He predicts that that this declaration, right, of his candidacy and his run for U.S. president for the third time. It's his third run, right? And in the first run, he didn't win the popular vote, but because of gerrymandering and and voter clout and all of these problems that we have with the Electoral College that we really don't need in the United States, he managed to steal, right, the office of presidency anyway, even though he didn't win the popular vote. And then, of course, in the second election, and we always knew this about Trump, right? We knew that if he didn't win, he was going to complain that the office was stolen from him, because this is who he is, right? He can never admit error. He can never admit defeat because his narcissism is too overwhelmingly, is too over. His relationship to narcissism is too complete to allow for the possibility of the recognition that it might be him who failed, who fell outside, right, of the terms that would define a relationship to Tellius's. So Trump's relationship to Tellius's is this: like, I'm perfect by virtue of being Trump, and if anyone, so if I say I have a high IQ, I have a high IQ, and if I take an IQ test and the IQ test determines that I have a low IQ, it's a problem with the IQ test, not a problem with me. If the results of the polls, say that I'm not popular with the demos, with the public, with the American people, it's a problem with the polls, not with me, right? If I didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize, it's a problem with the judges in the Nobel Peace Prize, not with me. If I'm not liked by a large segment of the population, or a large segment of the population thinks I'm a racist, it's not a problem with me. It's a problem with that segment of the population. If if Biden thinks that he won that second presidential electorate, it's and everyone else thinks so. Even if everyone in the whole world thought so, it's a problem with the world. It's not a problem with me because I don't lose. Because that by definition, the perfection, the relationship, the delusional relationship that he has with Telliasis is so profound, and because of the fragility. Essentially, it's a result. It's a reaction formation, right, of the fragility of this ego that has very difficulty, a lot of difficulty learning or understanding, comprehending the terms in which the world, and the world is complex, right? The world involves the part of the world involves like an understanding of the physics of the world, right? So that's why we take physics classes, biology, science, all this stuff. Well, Trump has a very difficult time understanding all of that, right? And then economics is a difficult thing too. But he's supposed to know something about economics because he has all of this money. So he keeps going bankrupt, and this is why he wants to hide his taxes, because his economic incompetence, right, is revealed in these tax records, and he doesn't want that to be revealed to the demos, to the American people, right? The apocalyptos, of the revealing of Trump's taxes is for Trump literally an apocalyptos, because it reveals his incompetence and his inability, right, to even maintain this vast fortune that was stolen by his father and perhaps grandfather, and and passed on to him, and which he continued to perform, right, these kinds of acts of theft and misrepresentation to attempt to keep, but largely because of his incompetence has only kept because of one could say shady deals and sort of backroom gangster types of moves that he's developed a practice of engaging in. In any case, David's prediction that this con artist, thief, and gangster, narcissist, social terrorist, in a certain sense, and violator of numerous constitutional laws that should from the very outset invalidate him from running for office again, but somehow supported by the fascist Republicans in the House and Senate haven't brought him into in any way near a form of justice for these various crimes, and even though he has no legitimate claim to the right to run for president because of the crimes that he's committed. There seems to be no justice in place that's willing to recognize aletheia for what it really is, and simply say, well, you've committed these crimes, and clearly you've committed them, and clearly as is stipulated in the 14th Amendment, Section 3, you are not qualified any longer to run for office, any office, but I mean, maybe he could run for dog catcher, but he certainly shouldn't be qualified, to run for the office of President of the United States. And if that isn't recognized, and he's allowed to run for office of the United States, well, you might as well. You might as well ignore the rest of the criminal offenses in the United States, and and let everybody out of jail, and just let everybody do whatever they like, because why should someone with this level of privilege be allowed, right, be allowed to perform and commit these acts without any consequences, legal consequences, or consequences of justice and recrimination? Why limit it to this particular individual? Well, I mean, psychologically, of course, the answer is people believe, what they want to believe, and they favor, right? They favor, who they like, and they disfavor, who they don't like. And in some ways, Trump's privilege and the excess privilege that he receives, from the law and from these various branches of the government, from Congress and from the Supreme Court and from the various courts, is just a simplification, one could say, of the dynamics of racism and bigotry, and it's like an oversimplification of the dynamics and bigotry in the United States. And but I digress. And what I really wanted to say was that obviously David's prediction about Donald's and I'll underscore this word, December, right? So we're underlining that Donald's December declaration towards the destruction of democracy was in a certain sense an error, a mistake, falls outside of Telaius in time. His prediction, but not too much, right? Because this was announced on I believe it was November 15th that Donald Trump would again attempt to run for the office of President of the United States, which he's not qualified to do, but will nevertheless, because he's above the law, right? As this figure, as this fascist Führer, he's above the law. And but we had already noted that as a space-time travel prediction made on October 15th, 2003, nevertheless, David got it pretty close, right? And only a few days off. And we had predicted from our point in space-time, which is contemporaneous with Trump, that he would announce this on November 14th, and it was a day off, but we have a lot of advantages over David's predictability, right? Because there's a as I've mentioned before, future memory is very difficult, and much more difficult than past memory, and this form of Sibylline or Delphic prophecy is. I don't think property and prophecy was really a parapraxis in the Freudian sense there. I think that was just being tired, because it's still only 6:25 in the morning, and I had to get up several times because it's cold now, it's winter, and Fiber needs to go outside and relieve himself more often, and then we have animals running around so outside that don't belong to us, and he gets interested in those, and if I don't let him out, he'll pee the carpet, and then I guess I didn't get up in time, and so he did pee the carpet, so then I have to spend time cleaning the carpet. And and then it's hard to get back to sleep. So even though it's not as early as it could be, because generally we get up a little bit before 5, but my sleep last night was interrupted several times, and so I'm still a little sluggish. So I don't think that, property and whatever other word that I was going to use was a parapraxis, proper, just sluggishness of the organs of the mouth, but it did allow, for aggressive engagement, with the nature of the slip that's created, for me, a problem of getting back to, exactly, where I was in the discourse. And I do remember that I was somewhere in the discourse talking about, this error and how we would, judge and evaluate it in David's, prophetic prediction regarding the future and this word, December. And I do remember that that digression exists, before I had, gotten to the part where I was going to talk about the alliteration and how that might be a part of, influencing, David's motivation to choose December over November, and then do we really want to constitute that as an error? But I don't exactly remember. In other words, if the motivation, right, like say that, for David, that it is kind of like a Freudian slip, like maybe the unconscious motivation, for this mistake, misrecognizing the moment that Trump was going to announce his candidacy for president, misrecognizing it as December, like was motivated by the desire to continue this chain of alliteration, that ties, Trump's name, beginning with Donald, with all of these other ideas like danger, deception, delusion, and then, relates it back to the story of Oedipus in these terms: Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Dramatikos, eironicus, Daulis toward Delphi, and all of that, right? And So in any case, our problem and our relationship to error is somewhat different in that in that the problem, lies now in the lack of one-to-one correspondence to each one of these segments in the promise, 17, and our need to continue on in discussing this part 12. So if we were to linearly sequence, and you'll recall that one of my difficulties is in linear sequencing. So I've described this neurocognitive difference that I have, and I've described it in various ways, but some of the dimensions of it includes, aspects of dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and part of the dyscalculia is a difficulty in sequencing, and for whatever reason, my mathematical difficulties and my difficulties with numbers is limited to counting. So linear sequencing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's limited to linear sequencing, right? Adding, subtracting, and remembering sequences of numbers. So it's very difficult for me to remember a telephone number, or it might be difficult for me to remember a date. I have to, and repetitions for me will help. But if I use a telephone number, say 10,000 times, then I'll probably remember it, for the rest of my life. But if I only use it, it'll take me at least 100 times even to get it into short-term memory. And some telephone numbers are just not worth spending, that much time trying to remember, because they're going to change or whatever. Or this was often the case for, things like, we'll create a password. How many passwords are you going to need? Because for me, or I think I've narrated, my problem with lockers, right? When I was in junior high school and high school, we had two lockers. We had a gym locker, and we had and we had what was called a street locker. And the street locker was for your books, and you put all your books in there, and then when you go from class to class, you go to your locker and you get the appropriate book. You're going to math class, you get the math book. You're going to English, you get your your novels or whatever you have for your English class. You're going to science class, you get your science book. Okay, so it's very simple, right? And then you go to your gym is like reserved for your gym clothes, and da 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 and whatever. So, but for me, like I could remember like the sequence of numbers for one. And I could, but I couldn't remember both, and this created a problem. So I never used my street locker, and I used my gym locker. And you say, well, why can't you just write it down on a piece of paper and carry it around? And like that sounds pretty easy, but then if you're, you have to understand that this is junior high school, right? And if this isn't obvious, it should be obvious, but this isn't David talking. This is just me introducing this piece. If you're in junior high school, right, and you're surrounded by kids at your locker, and you're pulling out a piece of paper, and because you can't remember your locker number, like these kids are going to tease you, and it's not just that they're going to tease you one time. It's like they're going to remember that you can't remember the combination to your locker. They're going to remember it, and they're not going to just tease you one time. And it's not just going to be that kid at your locker that's always at your locker, but this kid is going to tell all the other kids that you can't remember your locker number, and they're going to laugh. And then you're going to go from this class to this class, and these kids are going to laugh at you and bully you and hound you. And every day you're going to have to listen to these kids, right, singing their song about how you can't remember, the numbers to your locker. And this is the experience of having a disability in the United States. And under or outside of, right, the muse of Delphi, and whether you have a fascist president or not. But it certainly doesn't help when you have a fascist president. Let's put it this way. And so no matter what, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Because you're going to get teased if you carry around a bag with all your books in it. And you're going to get teased if you have to pull out a piece of paper every time you try to open your locker. So this is part of the experience of being dysgraphic, dyslexic, dyscalculic, elaic in the United States. Anyway, that describes, part of that element, of what's difficult for me, and perhaps why it's been difficult to take the idea of this muse, teleiosis, completion and perfection too seriously for me, not for David, but for me. So our problem in relationship to the muse teleiosis is that yesterday when we attempted to perform a reading, elaboration, and interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling, his part 11, which was our part 12, we failed to make it through, even to make it through half. So now here we are, and what should be our part 13 and what should be his part 12, right, with our n plus 1, which is that n is 16 and our plus 1 is just plus 1, so 17. So our numbers are off, right? And being off, the numbers being off, like for me, relates to that experience of part of the the social experience of the dyscalculia, and and underscores, right, the failure, right, to attain this perfection, this one-to-one correspondence in relationship to the 17 parts. And we have some options at this point, and I'll outline those options, and then in terms of numbering. But first, I have to say goodbye to Lori, who's leaving for work right now. All right, so Lori's left for work, and we've said goodbye, and we're back in our discussion, and I was reminded. Okay, so something. The error in a certain way, or the lack of correspondence, the one-to-one correspondence between the segments that David initially created and my inability to get everything in, and my desire, right, for completion, teleos, right? Teleos, right? Like that's also related to this Aristotelian idea of the telos of an object, like the purpose of it, right? The part of his ontology is recognizing what the thing is for, and that word in Greek is related to all of these other works. Words works is again another parapraxis that I believe is just a slip of the tongue that belongs to not getting enough sleep, because Fiverr woke me up at least 3 times. I remember one of those times was around midnight. One was around a little before 2, and then another was just before 5, and I was tempted just to stay up from that point on. I think I got a little bit more sleep after that. But in any case, these I believe we left off at the parapraxis words that I was referring to, and I referred to them as works, as in Hesiod's works and days, or works and sleepless nights, which would correspond better perhaps to the story of Scheherazade than Hesiod's works and days. But these words in Greek, teleiasis, which kind of emphasizes for me the idea of completion and perfection, as opposed to teleos, or teleios, which just is being finished, completed, and then the way that it's refigured in the idea of teleology, right? Like what is the which sort of picks up on Aristotle's take. What's another word for what I want to say here? But what is the cause? But what is the cause in this originary sense? Not cause effect chain, but rather from what purpose, or from what origin, seed, does this phenomenon arise in teleology. So I'm reminded in this now failure, right, to correspond like to the demands of teleiasis, that we have certain options, and Tom's response was to develop this kind of phobia, right, of performance that we call stage fright, and then to avoid avoid the situation, right? A phobia, you could say, is an avoidance situation response to an imaginary threat or an imaginary danger, and that's very difficult to overcome, because it's based in a delusion, and a subject's reaction formation to an imaginary threat can't be overcome in the same way that a subject's relationship to a real threat can be overcome by learning more about what the sense of what the danger is, learning how to avoid the pitfalls of such a danger, and we talked about the mamba, and learning learning about that mamba's behavior, and recognizing the signs of aggression, etc., etc. But there are other responses, that one can maintain in relationship to either the anticipated failure, to meet demands, the demands of Telaisis, or the actual failure to meet the demands of Telaisis, and once again, we're not in David's character yet. This is just a kind of introduction to the problem that we have now facing how we're going to number this section, whether it's going to be part 12 or part 12 .1 or part 12b, or whether it's going to be 13, and how we're going to respond to the rest of the piece. So but I'm reminded of this story that Max Ernst tells about his father, who was a landscape painter and a kind of, I don't believe impressionist, but if he was, rather I believe, he was a kind of realist painter, realist landscape painter. But even if he wasn't a realist in that, strict, sense, and was rather an impressionist, there's still an element in the impressionism, to which he belonged, that made a kind of like one-to-one correspondence between the visualization that occurred on the two-dimensional surface of the canvas and what the eye saw in this domain, that represents, for some of us reality, and for some of us just another dimension of illusion. And what I'm getting at here is this story that Max Ernst tells about his landscape painter father, and that he was painting this picture, but there was a branch in one of the trees that created a formal problem, in his orchestration, right? His symphonia, the arrangement with which he recounted, one could say almost recounted is a word like for putting these objects into an arrangement, right? And recall that Max Ernst was a collage artist extraordinaire, but his collage wasn't really designed in this manner that expressed this kind of formal two-dimensional visual perfection, but rather like he was interested in the semiotics and the semantics of these recombination of meaningful objects on this surface in relationship to one another and in arrangement to one another that did what? Well, precisely that brought these materials from the unconscious, right, to the surface, or suggested that they were like bringing unconscious materials to the surface via like the collision of these various aesthetically, in certain senses, uncoordinated, although they became more coordinated as he developed a technique for doing so. But like the early work is very awkward in a certain way, and the awkwardness is neither the point nor beside the point, but the awkwardness is there because what the real focus of the interest is bringing these semantically meaningful elements of that are taken out of the world together, and to see what happens. In that sense, experimental, and in that sense his muse was experimental. But Max Ernst tells this story about his father and how there was this tree, and this tree had this branch, and he was painting, right? And he wanted the picture to correspond with the reality that he was seeing, right? Either because he was an expressionist or because he was a realist. And that part I can't remember. And that lack of memory, maybe in my telling of this story, also represents my distance. A contract in V through theta is distance from this muse of Telaisis. This muse of, like, if there's a muse of perfected memory where Memne and Telaisis come together, like, well, what don't you remember? Well, I don't. My memory is imperfect, right? And for whatever reason, and that may be Freudian or not, and who cares in a way. But so I don't remember. I don't remember whether Ernst, a landscape painter father, was an impressionist or whether he was a realist. But what I do remember in the story that Max Ernst tells, and I'm pretty sure that this story that Max Ernst tells is neither a screened memory nor is it the truth. So if it's not a screened memory and it's an act of deception, this is you could say this is a lie that Max Ernst tells about his father, landscape painter father, right? You could say that he tells this lie or you could say that he opens up a discursive domain, just like Kathy Acker opens up a discursive domain involving the relationship to the muse parabasis or parabasis, the muse of transgression, and this idea, this theoretical idea developed by Herbert Marcuse that says, transgression is no longer possible because commercial culture and capitalism, right, has reappropriated to itself all of the potentialities, the psychic and sexual dynamic, forces that belong, right, to these acts that formerly could be regarded as transgressive. The culture has reabsorbed through what he refers to as repressive desublimation, right? And he says, like, that's why society used to say no, you can't look at pornography, no, you can't have a sexuality that falls outside of this binary, male female union. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. And then Marcuse's idea is, no, do it. Here's some of this. Buy it from us. Here's some of that. Buy this. Buy that. Buy this. Buy that. And even though I'm, shaking, David this way and that, you have to recall again that we haven't gotten to David's discussion yet, and this is just an introduction to it, and this is my discourse, not his. But in some ways, like, David now is a mask that I'm wearing, and but for me, and then when we get to David's part, then David will become David again, without being a mask, for me in a certain sense. But just like, right, Kathy Acker, you could say that, well, this is a lie that Kathy Acker tells about who her teacher was. Well, no, because she was on the road to Thebes and she needed to encounter this form of Laius that is represented by the idea of a repressive desublimation, and she needed to do so, walking on the road, or sitting as the Sphinx, or perhaps both, perhaps in the form of Oedipus and, right, the Sphinx, combined in a certain way, and under this muse of transgression, whether one, refers to her as a parabasis or parabasis or by any other name, right? A muse of transgression by any other name is still a muse of transgression, and so I'm almost positive, and that this is another example of a kind of narrative identification, narrative storytelling, that frames a relationship between the subject and an audience that explains and provides a context that's discursive, and therefore, like, we can define or we can label a discursive domain, right? And the rhetoric, that's involved in the construction of this discursive domain, may not be literally true, but the aletheia that under which it resides is that it helps explain a relationship of this subject's work, or perhaps if the subject isn't an artist, another aspect of this subject's personality that would not become clear, without this defining, one could say, like, meta level of narrative identification, which is performed under the aegis of rhetorical deception, right? Okay, so I'm almost entirely sure that this story, in that respect, is a fictive construction of a discursive domain. But the story this is the story that as a child, Max Ernst observed his father painting this landscape scene, and when he came to this branch, it presented a problem in the formal relationship of the elements that he wanted to constitute on the two-dimensional surface of his canvas. So what he did is he went to his woodshed and he got out a hatchet, and he went over, to the tree upon which this branch was giving him problems, and he lopped it off. He cut off the branch. And then, because he cut off the branch, right, of this tree, then the problem of the relationship, the correspondence, the one-to-one correspondence, right, which is part of my problem as as someone that has this experience of dyscalculia or dyscalculate or dyscalculue or however you pronounce that word, right? That it's difficult for me, to sequence and segment these relationships one to one between these numerical values and what they represent or correspond to, right? And that's why it's difficult for me to fill in those little bubbles on the Scantron, test without, missing one. Is like, where are we again? and that usually in the course of having to fill out a Scantron test, which used to be, I don't know if it still is, but used to be part of the process of taking a lot of different kinds of tests, like the SAT test, for example, that at some point, I would lose track, and I would be on, and I would think I would be filling out the bubble, right, for the number that I was on, but I was really filling out the bubble for number 14 when when I was supposed to be filling out the bubble for number 13, right? And I often wouldn't notice this until like say a half an hour in to having developed, like being off track for half an hour, and then I would catch it, and then I lost the half an hour, and I would have to like go back and refill out, and you would think this would be easy. Well, you just change, the answer and go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you're done, right? But for me, it was nearly impossible, like to coordinate, the movements of my fingers and to just simply move everything up, one number. And then, of course, in a high-stakes test, it's kind of like Tom, right, playing the grand piano. Like, you're like, get one thing wrong, or get one bubble, filled out wrong. Get one, perform one error, of conjoined, dysgraphia and dyscalculia, and then in the dysgraphia, right, like they tell you that you got to get all of this bubble filled in this very precise manner, right? That also involves a relationship to teliosis, right? Like, that bubble isn't quite filled in completely. And this word, teliosis, perfection, like completion, right? So that bubble is only, a 3/4 filled in or 90% filled in, so that the machine might misrecognize it, or that bubble is overfilled in. So that's a mistake too. So that's an overcompletion is also an error in relationship to teliosis. And so I have these multiple things going on where this graphia is making it difficult to fill in the bubbles, and I'm in erasing, right? In erasing all of these, like these bubbles that are off track, I'm creating holes and tears and perforations in the material. And I may even have to ask, right? I may even have to ask the test people if I can have a new, a Scantron. And then they become like suspicious. And like, well, what's your problem? And you'd think that, all of this could be avoided by just saying, well, I'm, dysgraphic and, and have this dyscalculia problem. But this wasn't a thing when I was, growing up. And there weren't really like provisions made. And you couldn't bring a calculator if, as, right, as an assistive technology if you had, because that wouldn't be, fair for everyone else. So, anyway, so this experience, right, of getting off, track with the numbers, there's a number of ways, that you can, and can't, deal with it depending on the context and your situation. So when Max Ernst's father, cuts off the branch on the tree, then the one-to-one correspondence between the visual reality of the landscape in which he resides and the image that appears on the surface of his canvas is restored, right? So the act of violence against the tree, which in a certain way it is an act of violence, and part of Max Ernst the discursive domain that he opens up, by narrating this story, which I'm pretty much convinced is untrue and is fictional, but in a certain sense it reveals a higher level of truth that I'm certainly not going to dispute. May have belonged to the personality of Max Ernst's father, and the correspondence is restored. Right? And this was a kind of like restoration of the one-to-one correspondence that I couldn't perform, in taking an SAT test or a GRE test or any test, right, as a child. And that therefore, got in my way, because I couldn't restore it and say, hey, I'm going to continue taking this test. Can someone please assign, these values, properly into a new Scantron and fill in all the bubbles correctly, while I continue with the test. We didn't have, right? We didn't have that kind of assistance or that kind of allowance, right? In other words, I didn't have the proper hatchet or authority to use a hatchet, to restore the one-to-one correspondence that was required by the terms under which, Tellius resided over, right, the testing apparatus, which didn't, in my case, it wasn't about testing the information knowledge, but about, how to perform the activities required by the test. Fiverr. We had another interruption because Fiverr, one of my dogs, the three-legged dog, is concerned over this new puppy that the neighbors have that is pretty much neglected and abandoned during the course of the day. He's not a house dog, I guess, and it's really cold here. It gets into the I don't know. I'm pretty good in the cold, but for a little puppy, it's not good. It gets into the single digits at night, and he's out all night, and he's here all other than the fact that there's another dog in the yard. He's alone without supervision all day, so he cries and makes these noises, and then Fiverr wants to comfort him and cries in return, and needed to go outside and investigate what's going on with this crying puppy who's essentially, as I said, neglected and overlooked and, not cared for in a way that's proper to the needs, of an animal that, certainly has, a certain set of survival skills, but shouldn't, perhaps be left outside indiscriminately, 24 hours a day and under the conditions of, these kind of sub-freezing, temperatures. So Fiverr's outside and being concerned outside, and I can return to this discussion. So in terms of this narrative that I've reiterated, from Max Ernst and Max Ernst's father's solution, I can now that we're off, right, and that this apparently should be part 13, but still corresponds with David Antin's part 11, and we no longer have the n plus 1 informing the articulation of these various segments, and I have a few options, and I have a few potential solutions, and one of those solutions is the Max Ernst father solution, right? I can either kind of lop off the remainder of this section, which for David's purposes would be part 11, and then I can go on to David's part 12, and then just label this part 13, or or I can request. I don't know if I can really request a new Scantron, but if I were to do that, we would be back on track, and we'd be back under the aegis of a one-to-one correspondence, right? Under the aegis of a kind of one-to-one teleiosis correspondence, based on our initial organization of this n+1, that is 16 plus 1 and 17 part reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Ann's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling, or I can continue to label this part 12, and then the resultant segmentation will include 17 now, plus 1, which is like a reorganization of the n. The n plus 1 now becomes the n, and and however many additional installments that I'm required, right, like to catch up with David, will become whatever it is that's added to the n. So we have n plus 1, which is 16 plus 1, and then if I put a bracket around that, then so that's 17. So then if I put a bracket around that, around the n plus 1, which is 17 now, and then I add another number to that, then in a certain sense, I've performed something that I suppose is an example of errorful learning, as opposed to what Max Ernst's father does, which is to readjust the reality of the correspondence between the landscape and what he wants to perform as the aesthetic, right, interpretation of that landscape on the two-dimensional surface of the canvas. And so, in other words, in the need to challenge the idea of the initial set of n plus 1 and to reorganize it, I'm including the idea of the error and the lack of a one-to-one correspondence between the n plus 1 and the original intentionality of the work. And that's a possibility. And then as I said, another possibility is the Max Ernst father solution, which is just to finish this segment with whatever is required, with whatever number of verbal discourses and representations and video representations is required, and then to omit, right, or leave out, just like all storytellers leave out the details that they know about a particular thing, and but feel are irrelevant or distracting or digressive, and make certain kinds of editing choices, which we could take as being examples of collaging choices, right, if we wanted to bring it back to that. So there are a number of potential solutions, but I wanted to, at the outset, before we proceed any further into the recounting of the story of Oedipus as it's told from in the Sophocles, and then move on from there, after we've done that, to comparing that manner of storytelling and that way of storytelling that is conveyed in Sophocles' Oedipus the King with the way that it's told in Aristophanes, which in a certain way is more interesting as an example of the complexities of the Metapoetics of Paranarratology than the way that the story is told in Sophocles. Although Sophocles is, I don't want to discount Sophocles' abilities, but perhaps one could say that the torque and the force of Sophocles, abilities in storytelling relate more to narratology than they do to paranarratology, and to poetics, more than they relate to metapoetics. Poetics. So I wanted to problematize that, before proceeding into, and because I name these pieces, and because part of the subtitle of each piece includes this part and then a number. I'm faced with making a determination here in this discourse, prior to naming what we're going to talk about today, and I'm not really sure what my solution set is going to be. I don't think I'm going to perform the function of Max Ernst's father and lop off some of the future segments that we engage with in this recounting of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling. But I also feel like under the pressure of this initial promise that I provided, that this would be a 17-part reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling. So before I say this is part 12, or part 13, or part 12a, or part 12b, or part 12c, I felt the need to, provisionally qualify that it may or may not, be, part 12 or part 13, because I haven't decided yet what my solution to fitting all of this into a 17-part, discussion is going to be. Now, because this is going on, this section is going on for too long, it could still add up to 17 if I can bind, like say I combine, what for David is, part 13 with what for David is part 14, and for what David is with part 15. Say that I combine all of those into part. So because I'm expanding here, if I contract later, right? So if I perform this in 3 or 4 parts, but then I perform 3 or 4 parts of what David does in one part, I can get back to that number 17, that n+1, and then I don't have to recalculate or redefine the n+1 as a new n plus x, right? That's a possibility. That solution set, that solution set actually appeals to me more than the solution set of than the solution set of transforming the n+1 into new n plus x, and then at the end we would have, say, whatever, 19. We'd have 19 actual pieces, but that represent a 17-part reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling, which is in fact, a 16-part representation, as you understand from the n+1. Okay, so that solution set I like, and I don't like the lopping off the Max Ernst solution sets, but I'm still concerned in part by. Let me digress within this digression a little bit and describe a situation. When I was a student teacher at Brooklyn Technical High School. So after I left the academy, I abandoned my dissertation on the relationship between music and imagery in an experimental film, and I had all of these different. I had sorted all of these different categories of the way that that music can interact with the themes and elements of visual representation in experimental film, and these were largely like discordant relationships. So I had all of these like examples of types of discordant relationships, and I had like these cognitive theories about how consciousness brought like these discordant elements together, and that like metaphor, right, like metaphor, the transference of conditions and properties of one idea to another idea, that this required a certain amount of work and labor on the part of consciousness, as opposed to the simple kind of like Mickey Mousing of a sound or a feeling that was in a condition of confluence that represented harmonia, right? So in other words, like if someone's sad and you have this sad music, right, the mind doesn't have to work very hard like to put those two ideas together. It's like it's almost redundant. And in that sense, it's more like a synonym, and like the underscoring of this idea that the filmmaker had somehow failed to capture entirely, sufficiently, right, by means other than adding this music. And so like there's this idea of like using music as a kind of like embellishment and plenitude, like reinforcing, a certain sense, like reinforcing the continuity between the fictive domain and the response that you're supposed to have to the fictive domain, and therefore like all of those apparatuses that involve narrative identification with a particular character, so the rhetoric and syntax, supporting the rhetoric and syntax of the apparatus itself in the depiction of the fictive reality and the domains of deception that it makes. Now that's all fine. But what I was really interested in was like those ways in which consciousness operated in cinema under conditions in which it was required, right, like to make determinations and decisions about interpretation that weren't like overdetermined by simple one-to-one correspondences. All right, so this was the idea of the dissertation, but I abandoned that and I gave it up because I was concerned with this event. One could call it an event, and it was occurring in time, and it was occurring in my time, and the event was that the city of New York had determined that this old building, which had been abandoned, for years, but was located on Roosevelt Island and was once the site of a mental institution from which in which displaced individuals from New York and the local environs, beyond Manhattan and Long Island as well, were relocated because they were undesirable, and they were displaced to this island, and for various reasons. There was a smallpox hospital. There were other kinds of examples of isolating these contaminant individuals, right? And this madhouse, right, that was built in the shape of an octagon tower, and there's a whole history of the octagon towers belonging to the architectural history of madhouses, not only in the United States but in Europe as well, that play out ideas of Jeremy Bentham's panopticon, and this building, right, like carried so much history for me, and a history of displacement and sorting, and how individuals are marginalized under the conditions of cognitive normalcy or good health, right? And how this island, once called Blackwell's Island, was this like detention center, right, for displaced individuals, like get them out of our sight. And this moment, which was sometime in the 1990s, Roosevelt Island was already like in the process of gentrification. Had been for a number of years, if not decades. And at one time it was referred to as Blackwell's Island. At one time it was referred to as Welfare Island. It became Roosevelt Island in reference to policies of President Roosevelt, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and But this new project was going to be to develop this site, which was no longer in use and hadn't been in use, for many years, for many decades, but to transform it into a luxury apartment complex. And it struck me that this was profoundly wrong, and it was wrong in the same way that it would be wrong to transform Auschwitz into a luxury vacation village, and that no one got that this was that profoundly wrong was also troublesome to me, and it also and I guess because it marked the fact that we continue in whatever advances that we think that we've made in overcoming our social biases and bigotries. We continue to marginalize individuals that we refer to now as mentally ill, that we once referred to as mad, as being profoundly other than ourselves. And even though we often exploit their work and their lives for whatever profit we see fit. Like we love to love our toe, but most of us have never spent any time either assisting individuals diagnosed with mental illness and in their lives and economies, nor have we, for the most part, experienced what Artaud experienced. So this project that I left this dissertation for was precisely that, to begin experiencing what Artaud experienced and to performing under the terms of these institutions and the way that they performed upon certain individuals for acting outside of the parameters of the norm, all types of incarceration and deleterious medical practices, and my interest in survivors and non-survivors of mental institutionalizations, increased at that point, and I had never really been interested in, like say the poet, Sylvia Plath, never really interested me, before I began this project. But once I began this project, and as part of the research for the project, read not only like literature, but narrative accounts of survivors and individuals who failed to survive like this kind of institutionalization, I became interested in Sylvia Plath and some of like what she does in the poetry as a sort of result of my reading of the Bell Jar and coming to terms with some of the conflicting accounts of her narrative experience. And of course I realized very early that the power of telling the story belongs to the institution, not to the madman. And so it's very difficult to find the aletheia in the story of the madman without participating in the institutional apparatus itself, and I wanted to do this, as I've said before, from various positionalities, right? All right, so I left the academy in order to do this kind of performative work and explore this in relationship to this specific event, but in doing so, right? And in participating with it, I sort of began, to realize like what a deep pit this was that I performatively and performancely dug myself into. And at one point, I wanted to return to, a kind of, more normative relationship to the conditions of the social apparatus, one could say, right? And I thought, okay, so I don't really want to go back to the academy, but, maybe I could still be a teacher. So I thought, okay, so I got into this program at Teachers College, and I thought, maybe I'd be a high school teacher. And, that way I could avoid some of the difficulties involved in publication and this I don't know, kind of how to put it, a kind of social network that I wasn't really interested in playing a part in. And I had problems with I had problems with what seemed to me like to be a disparity between the articulation of a kind of like liberal or left in form, like theoretical exploration of this rhetoric, that didn't really correspond with the way that people lived, and produced, right, or reproduced these apparatuses of sorting. Like I had been aware for a long time, like how these apparatuses of sorting like marginalized me from the very outset, and how individuals got into these institutions and how they were trained once they were in these institutions. And it seemed to me like there was this discourse on one level going on where, like, you could imagine that, okay, so parapraxis is belongs to this domain of we're going to interpret parapraxis from this Freudian perspective, right? And this is what it means. But parataxis, like, let's take this different example of like collage, right? We're going to interpret this from this Marxist perspective, and the twain shall never meet, right? Like disability studies, like wasn't particularly evolved, or at least it wasn't like particularly foregrounded, in the institutions that that I participated in. And if you tried like to make these critiques and say like, well, but what about like the way that this social apparatus is using this to exclude you, and how do you how do you justify this artificial rhetoric that you've constructed around this thing, to in some way like the social rhetoric was just a justification for privileges that already belong to these positionalities that didn't really need or require justification. So you might anyway. So I was concerned with all of that, and I didn't think that I wanted to get back into the academy, like to argue these questions one way or the other, because it seemed to me like it was a domain in which these discrepancies were gonna march on in one direction or another, and if you wanted to, you could probably better challenge them from outside of the academy than you could within them, because just like Herbert Marcuse's repressive sublimation, right? The academy could reabsorb into itself any contradiction, like and Derrida in particular really like demonstrated this. Like the notion of deconstruction really demonstrated this, where any contradiction just could be reabsorbed by the discourse, and so it could spit itself out and be very happy with itself and having resolved this conflict while still reproducing the conditions under which injustice and oppression were being committed, both within and outside the apparatus of the institution in which like these ideas were being created, right? So it seemed to me like that it was pretty hopeless. And then I found this was pretty much the same in lower education as well, but at the time, like, I wasn't aware that I was going to encounter that. So I thought maybe I could still be a good teacher, but I could teach at the high school level. So I took these programs at a teacher's college, right, in New York, and which is part of the Columbia University system, as well as partner colleges. And I had done I had been an adjunct at Barnard for a brief period of time, but that was while I was doing the performative work on mental illness, and the the mental illness performance, and my performance at Barnard kind of intersected in curious and really, transgressive and uncomfortable ways, and that was, fine. But I thought, okay, I'm going to be done with this, and I'm going to go on to something else. And I didn't realize, how far from being done with the exploration of the institutionalization of individuals diagnosed with mental illness I was at that time. But I made, so this, you could say this was like a brief intermission or attempt, right, to get out of the engagement with institutionalization and displacement that I had begun. And that, moment, took place at Teachers College. And then I did my student teaching, program at Brooklyn Technical High School, which is, where David, went to high school. And Brooklyn Technical High School was amazing. But the point is, in this long digression, is that that my supervising instructor, my supervising teacher, when I was doing this work, as a student teacher, and I had so I know that some student teaching, basically you get to teach 1 or 2 classes and you watch the teacher, but basically I took over the whole class. I came up with the syllabus, I came up with the reading list, I came up with the interpretations, and then, it was basically, I had 2 classes, and basically they were, my classes, and I came up with all the projects, and I had to, struggle, with the teacher in a certain way, or argue back and forth about, what I wanted to do, because what I wanted to do was, not entirely, part of the, what was usually done, although, I didn't select anything too far outside of, what belonged to the curriculum, the New York State curriculum, but the way that I organized it around social issues and themes and topics, such as the politics, in the Harlem Renaissance, or and then another one was looking at some of these representations of mental illness in this literature, which wasn't a topic that was typically certainly some of these books say Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, were options that were available in the curriculum, but the way that I organized them into thematic units were not typical ways of engaging, because they were social critiques, right, and they weren't oh, look at what this narrative does, and it was more like look at the way that we construct these individuals and what does that mean, so I was in this situation, and my supervising, right, teacher, under whom I'm receiving this tutelage, which is in some way like a mentorship, right, really disliked if one of my thematic lessons went longer than a single course period, and she had this idea, and this was her metaphor, was that it's a meal. So she said, so if you think about these the time that this course session lasts, right? You're teaching these ideas, and this is the class period. So the class period should be like a meal, and and it should have it's like a meal, and you have these courses, right? So your first course is whatever, you have a salad, and maybe you have soup, and then you have the main course, and then you have dessert, and then you're done, and then you move on to the next one. And she said yours is more you get the salad, but then you don't get the soup until the next day, and then you get the meal, and then on the 4th day you get the you get the dessert, and everybody is unsatisfied. And I thought, well, that's fine if a course period really is a meal and that metaphor is really adequate. But for me, the idea of a lesson, of a single theme or a concept or an idea that needed to be carried over from Monday to Tuesday, wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't as imperative as having your soup, salad and main course and dessert, all in the same hour or hour and a half, and but for her, there was a one-to-one correspondence, right, between the terms under which you were allowed to operate as a result of the the predetermined length of the class period and the ideas that you wanted to present, and that should be complete. So from this one-to-one correspondence model in which I was mentored, right, like the and of course, you don't argue with your supervising, mentor. You develop a way of presenting presenting the information that you want to present under the terms of whatever metaphor it is that is providing the conditions under which you can do that. So the conditions of this metaphor of class period as a meal, complete in and of itself, were the conditions under which I learned to perform this this manner of teaching, and so so today, when we're going on to whatever part this is, part 12 or part 13 or part 12.b or whatever we want to designate it as, I can't help, but be reminded of the fact that I've failed, under the conditions of this metaphor's, telaiasis, and that I've offered, whatever it is that I've offered, whatever it is that I offered yesterday, right, in the reading of in the reading of the first part of David's interpretation of Sophocles' presentation of the story of Oedipus. I've left out like the remainder of that, and then I've left out what he performs, which is the comparative analysis or the comparative description and discussion, because it's not really analytical, but and a lot of it's just hints, right? Like he puts these two things together, kind of collages them together, and it lets us figure out what's going on our own. But certainly left out the entirety of the Aristophanes, and so like a lot of the terms even in David's description, like for example Dramatikos eironicus and Dramatikos anagnoreikos don't even come into play until we get to the Aristophanes version. And those terms, as I may or may not have mentioned, relate to the two messengers. The messenger who's just called the messenger, and the messenger who's called the shepherd. And they're and this is again a spoiler alert, but the fact that in Aristophanes that these characters are twins, in fact are twins, that the messenger is in fact a twin with the shepherd, separated for a long period of time, but certainly recognize one another in the physical relationship of resemblance that they have to one another, and that's kind of a surprise, but also creates this comedy of errors, which isn't resolved until the last parts of their names is revealed, right? So that until Dramatikos is confused with Dramatikos until it's revealed that Dramatikos eironicus is not the same twin that Dramatikos anagnoreikos is, right? And that we'll get to that, and as I said, this spoiler, right, already gives you some idea where we're going, and we'll get where we'll arrive when we get to David Antin's recounting of danger, deception, delusion. Well, not recounting, because he titles it that, but recounting of Aristophanes' version of Oedipus in Aristophanes' comedic play, The Smile of the Sphinx, which he presents as a recounting and interprets in his part 11, which is our part 12, danger, deception, delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis toward Delphi, and Donald's December declaration toward the destruction of democracy. And as I noticed, I had wanted to return to our part 12, his part 11 today, and to move toward completing danger, deception, delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis toward Delphi, and Donald's December declaration toward the destruction of democracy. I had wanted to move back to that moment in which we left off, and I believe that we left off in that moment where Oedipus learns that Polybus, has died of natural causes, and is like somewhat, excited about that and happy about that, and then that happiness is misrecognized as a kind of malice towards his father, perhaps, because it's not understood. Well, how can you be happy? I just told you that your father is dead, and this is the way that it occurs in the Sophocles, right? And this is where we left off. And I had hoped to pick this up from there, and yet when I look at the time that's designated on this recording and see that we've already recorded, a long, segment, I'm tempted, and I can certainly do this because we haven't returned yet really to our part 12. We've only returned to a description, leading up to the problems of how we're going to name either our part 12, part 2, or our part 12, 13, that I realized that I can end this piece, here or somewhere else, and I can refer to this piece as yet another, interlude. So perhaps this is. Perhaps we can title this piece and resolve, some of these, or just defer. Perhaps this is just a deferral of the problem of titling this piece, and counting, the elements, because this won't solve anything, but it won't make anything worse from where we ended up yesterday either, right? So I haven't. This solution, right, offers a way out of the fact that I've digressed so far, like, puts us back even further, right? And so you could say this is compounding the error, or like we're falling, further away, from Telaiasis than we started out, and then the only way that we can salvage that is if I cut this piece entirely and just threw it into the trash bin, and like right, very much like Max Ernst's father and that branch of the tree, and this branch we just throw away, because this is the disabled branch in a certain sense, right? This is the branch that recounts the dysgraphia and the dyscalculia and plays around with all those notions of this game of playing with parataxis, versus parapraxis, and speaking and error and all this stuff, but doesn't really belong in a strict sense, to varieties of rhetorical deception in narrative and non-narrative storytelling. May belong to it in this way as paranarratology, in a certain sense, as a metapoetics of paranarratology, above and beyond a 17-part elaboration and or interpretation of David Antin's varieties. In other words, this would be n+1, with the n, the n initially representing the, okay, so we could designate varieties of rhetorical deception in narrative and non-narrative storytelling as the n, right? And then to the n, like let's say that we're not adding something, but we're saying that this n exists under the domain of, and the way that we're going to engage it as an a under or through f, the image of a under or through f, right? And so the image of a becomes the n. So the A is the N at this point, and that N or A, as in this the set theory construct of image, right? So the image is varieties, and we're going to also designate it with an A. So image as A under, or image is already A, but image A as N under varieties of rhetorical deception in narrative and non-narrative storytelling, right? And the F, under which it was investigated, was notes towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1. Okay, so now, if we wanted to do it this way, we could reorganize it as the A as N now becomes, bracket it off, and then put all of that in a bracket or in a set, and that A as N is now notes towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1, a 17-part reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in narrative and non-narrative storytelling, end of bracket, to the F, which is, once again, something that we already defined within the new A, right? So the F is now notes towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1. So you got this. Image of A as notes towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1, a 17-part reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Narrative Storytelling, through or under F, notes towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1. And in that sense, right, it does belong to the discussion and isn't an interlude. But clearly, it's much simpler to define part X or N, whatever number we're going to assign to it, as part interlude or interlude part X, and then just call it that, like we did with the 5 plus 5, right? And then we can continue. We don't even really need like David's title for this section: danger, deception, delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis toward Delphi, and Donald's December declaration toward the destruction of democracy. We can just assign it further or whatever it was, paradigressions 2, and then come up with a subtitle for paradigressions 2, and it could relate to Max Ernst or Brooklyn Technical High School, or play with the various ideas of dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and the terms under which error is defined by these institutions and social apparatuses. So I think we'll do that.